Before the wind learned her name, before the frontier decided what she was worth, before the world began measuring her life in ledgers and liabilities. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this were never meant to be rushed. They were lived slowly, painfully, one decision at a time. And if you stay with it, you'll understand why some people survived only because they refused to let go of one another. The wind came across the flats outside Ridgewater Crossing like it had been waiting all winter for this moment. It drove snow sideways, sharp and merciless, cutting through wool and leather, finding skin no matter how carefully it was covered. It was the kind of wind that didn't simply freeze you, but tested whether you intended to keep standing. On the raised wooden platform beside the rail spur, warped from years of boots and weather, Eliza Mae Turner stood without moving, her feet planted wide, her back straight, beneath a coat that had once belonged to her husband and had since been let out, taken in, patched, and repatched until its original shape was only a memory. 13 children stood with her. They had not been arranged or instructed. They had gathered themselves instinctively, the way living things gathered around the one certainty left to them. The youngest, a boy barely 2 years old, slept bound to Eliza's chest in a sling, his cheek pressed against her, his breath warm and steady. He did not know where he was. He did not know what was happening. The oldest, Samuel, had just turned 17 and stood half a step forward, his jaw clenched, his shoulders squared, already practicing the stillness the world demanded from men before it ever treated them as such. Between them were 11 more, thin and thick, sharp-eyed and hollow-cheeked, frightened and furious in equal measure, each gripping a sleeve, a skirt, a hem, or another child's hand. No one cried. Crying had stopped earning mercy years ago. The clerk cleared his throat and read from the ledger as if he were announcing livestock. Widow Eliza Turner, age 41, 13 dependents. The number moved through the gathered men like arithmetic, not cruelty. Calculation. Hands slid deeper into coat pockets. Boots shifted against frozen ground. Eyes narrowed, not at Eliza's face, but at the children. 13 mouths, 13 winners, 13 chances for sickness, weakness, and ruin. Someone laughed once, sharp and brief. Another muttered something about God having a cruel sense of humor. A man near the front spat into the snow and said, "That ain't a wife. That's a famine." Eliza did not flinch. She had learned long ago that dignity was not something granted by witnesses. It was something you carried when there was nothing left to trade. Behind her, officials from the Territorial Family Placement Bureau stood with papers already prepared. They did not look at the children. They looked at the forms. They had learned how to survive their work by not seeing too much. If no bid was placed soon, the documents would move forward. The children would be divided. Some sent to farms that needed small hands and asked no questions. Some to mills farther east, where daylight barely reached the floor. Some to households that wanted help, but not history. The youngest might be adopted if he was fortunate. The older ones would be indentured until the law declared them free and the world proved otherwise. Eliza had known this when she signed her name in Kansas City. She had known it when she sold her husband's tools to pay for passage west. She had known it when she promised her children that the frontier was different, that it had room for people like them. She had known she was lying, but she had also known that doing nothing would have been a quieter way to lose them. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. "Opening offer," he said flatly. $100. Covers settlement fees and responsibility for the woman and all 13 children. Silence answered him. The wind hissed through the cracks in the boards. Someone coughed and stopped themselves. Eliza felt it, but did not turn. 80, the auctioneer tried. Nothing. 50, a man leaned toward his neighbor and said, not quietly enough, I'll take 2 boys, strong ones, don't want the rest. Samuel's shoulders tightened. Eliza laid a hand on his arm, firm and grounding. He did not look at her, but he stayed. The gavel rose again. The clerk behind her adjusted the papers, already preparing to finalize what everyone assumed was inevitable. I'll take them. The voice came from the back of the crowd. It was not loud. It did not hurry. It did not ask permission. Every head turned. The man stood slightly apart, as if the land itself had decided where he belonged. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his frame built by labor rather than comfort. His coat was buckskin, darkened and scarred by years of weather. His beard carried gray. His face bore old cuts that had healed without care for appearance. He looked less like someone who had arrived and more like someone who had been waiting. His name was Cole Barrett. Most of Ridgewater Crossing knew him only as rumor. The man who lived beyond the timberline. The one who trapped alone. The one who came down only when winter forced his hand. The one no woman followed and no child returned from. All of them, Cole said again when the auctioneer hesitated. The woman and all 13 children. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, you understand? I understand, Cole said. You're selling responsibility. I'm buying it. And your bid? The auctioneer asked. Cole stepped forward. His boots pressed into the frozen mud and stayed there. $300. The number landed like a dropped tool. Final. Heavy. No one paid that for land. No one paid that for mouths. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not disbelief, so much as confusion. Why would a man choose this? Cole's eyes lifted and met Eliza's. He did not linger on her size or the children clinging to her. He looked at her the way a man looked at terrain he intended to cross. Serious, unromantic, attentive. You'll work, he said plainly. All of you, when you're able. We already do, Eliza replied. I don't offer comfort, he continued. This land kills people who expect kindness. I'm not looking for kindness. Your children stay together, Cole said. That's not negotiable. Something tightened behind Eliza's ribs, but her voice stayed steady. I accept. She signed her name without hesitation. It was the last time she would sign it alone. They left Ridgewater Crossing before the sun finished sinking. The wagon was heavy with children, supplies, and the kind of silence that followed when the world let you go not out of mercy, but because someone else claimed you first. Cole drove without speaking. Eliza sat beside him, the youngest warm against her chest, the others bundled in the wagon bed, eyes always watching. They camped that night near a frozen creek. Cole built the fire with practiced efficiency. Eliza cooked what little they had. 13 children ate without complaint, their eyes flicking between the man and the flames. Hunger had taught them discipline. They don't need to fear me, Cole said eventually. They fear everything, Eliza replied. That's how they survived. Cole nodded. He understood that language. The homestead sat high in a bowl of stone and pine, where the air thinned and the world narrowed to essentials. The cabin was solid, built to endure rather than impress. A barn leaned nearby, weathered, but sound. "This is home," Cole said. The children stared. It didn't look gentle. It looked honest. And Eliza knew, standing there with 13 lives pressed against her future, that survival had only just begun. The first week taught Eliza Turner that the land did not care how desperate you were. It did not care how many children followed you into its reach, or how badly you wanted it to be different from everything that had failed you before. Morning came whether you were ready or not. Cold bit whether you deserved it or not. Work waited whether your body could answer or not. Cole Barrett did not soften any of that, and in some quiet, unspoken way, Eliza was grateful for it. They rose before dawn. Not because Cole barked orders or struck the walls with his voice, but because the mountain demanded daylight be used while it was available. The children learned quickly who could do what. Samuel and the next two boys, Henry and Luke, split wood until their hands blistered and their shoulders burned. The older girls hauled water, swept the cabin, and learned how to cook over a temperamental stove that punished inattention. The smaller ones gathered kindling, fed the chickens, carried what they could, and learned early that usefulness was a form of safety. Cole watched everything. He corrected without humiliating. He showed rather than explained. When Henry split a log poorly, Cole took the axe, adjusted his stance, demonstrated once, then handed it back. When one of the girls burned a pot of beans, he ate them anyway, and said nothing except, "Next time, stir slower." Eliza took note of these things the way a woman who had kept 13 children alive always did. She did not trust easily, but she observed relentlessly. She noticed that Cole never ate until the children had eaten, that he checked the roof before nightfall, that he fixed small things immediately instead of waiting for them to become dangerous, that he never commented on her size, not once, not with praise or criticism or suggestion. He spoke to her as if she occupied exactly the space she was meant to occupy. At night, after the children were asleep in their careful arrangement of blankets and shared warmth, Eliza sat by the fire mending, her needle moving from muscle memory, listening to the sounds of the house, the wind in the trees, the fire settling. Cole's boots as he moved quietly, checking doors, checking stock, checking the world one last time before allowing himself rest. "You kept 13 alive," he said one evening, staring into the fire rather than at her. "That's not luck." "No," Eliza replied. "It's refusal." Winter lingered longer at that elevation. Snow clung to the ground with stubborn intent. Supplies thinned faster than Eliza liked, and she took to keeping quiet mental tallies of what they had and how long it would last. She had done this before. Hunger arithmetic was not new to her. What was new was having someone else who understood it without explanation. Spring arrived reluctantly, bringing not softness, but tension. The creek that cut through Cole's land swelled with meltwater, running fast and clear, and with it came men who had not been invited. The first was Garrick Boone, riding with 2 others, his horse fat, his clothes expensive in a way that suggested cattle money rather than labor. "That water feeds my herds," Boone said easily, as if stating a fact rather than staking a claim. "I'll be diverting some of it come summer." Cole did not answer immediately. He stood with his hands at his sides, posture loose, unreadable. Eliza stepped forward before he could speak. "You won't," she said calmly. Boone looked at her then, properly, his eyes traveling over her and dismissing her just as quickly. "I wasn't speaking to you." "You are now," Eliza replied. "You don't own this land, you don't own this water, and you don't get to decide what happens here." Boone laughed. It was a pleasant sound, practiced, the laugh of a man accustomed to resistance, collapsing eventually. "You think I rode all this way to be told no by a woman and her children?" Eliza felt the children behind her, pressed close, watching. She felt the old fear stir, the one that whispered about consequences and retaliation. She set it aside. "You rode all this way to find out how much trouble you're willing to buy," she said. "Now you know." Boone's smile thinned. He glanced at Cole, who still hadn't spoken. "You planning to let her do the talking?" Boone asked. Cole finally looked at him. "She already said everything I would have." The men rode away with polite smiles and eyes that promised return. Eliza watched them go and knew the shape of trouble when she saw it. She had lived long enough to recognize the kind that waited until you were tired. The weeks that followed confirmed it. Strangers began riding past the property more frequently. Tracks appeared where none had before. The children were instructed to stay close. Samuel was given a rifle and taught how to hold it, how to breathe, how not to fire unless told. Eliza noticed the way Cole checked the horizon more often now, the way his silence sharpened. One night, as the wind rattled the cabin and the children slept, Eliza spoke what had been pressing against her ribs. "They won't stop," she said. "Men like that never do." Cole nodded. "No. And you knew this would happen when you took us," she said, not accusing, simply stating. "Yes." "Why?" she asked. "Why take on 13 children and a woman everyone else turned away from, knowing it would bring this kind of attention?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because the world already decided you were expendable. I don't agree with the world." Eliza felt something shift then. Not soften, but align. The attack came just after dusk, 3 days later. It began with the sound of glass breaking. Eliza was on her feet instantly, heart hammering, already moving the children toward the back wall, as Cole reached for his rifle. Shadows moved outside, fast and deliberate. A second window shattered. Someone shouted. Firelight flared where it didn't belong. "Get down," Cole ordered, voice sharp and controlled. Gunfire cracked through the night. Wood splintered. The children screamed once, then went silent at Eliza's command, huddling together as she covered them with her body, her arms wide, shielding without thought. Cole fired back, each shot measured. Eliza could smell smoke now, could hear boots on snow, men circling, testing. "They're trying to burn us out," she said. "I know," Cole replied. A torch hit the side of the cabin and guttered. Eliza grabbed a bucket and doused it before flame could take. Another torch came from a different angle. Eliza didn't think. She picked up the rifle Cole had set aside earlier and fired blindly toward the tree line. She missed, but the torch fell. The fight stretched long and brutal. The children stayed where they were told, terror held at bay by obedience and trust. Eliza moved between them and danger with a calm she did not recognize until later. When Cole was hit, a sharp grunt and the sound of flesh meeting lead, she was at his side before he hit the floor. "Through the shoulder," he said, teeth clenched. "I'm still useful." She packed the wound with shaking hands that did not stop moving. She had stitched worse by candlelight in worse places. Blood did not frighten her. Losing him did. Hooves thundered in the distance just as the attackers made their final push. A voice shouted authority. More gunfire, this time disciplined, controlled. By the time the smoke cleared, U.S. Marshal Thomas Hale stood in the doorway, his face hard as winter stone. "This ends tonight," he said. Boone was among the men dragged into the light, his expensive coat torn, his smile gone. The children watched from the shadows, eyes wide, taking in the truth of survival. Later, when the house was quiet again and the wounded were tended, Eliza sat beside Cole as dawn crept in through broken windows. "You should have run," he said quietly. "Taken the children." Eliza shook her head. "I don't run anymore." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and something unspoken passed between them. The frontier had taken its measure of them, and they were still standing. The days after the attack passed with a strange, brittle quiet, the kind that followed violence once the shouting stopped and the damage remained. Boards were nailed over broken windows. Blood was scrubbed from the floor until the wood showed pale beneath it. Smoke stains lingered, no matter how hard Eliza scoured, a reminder pressed into the grain of the house that safety was never permanent. Cole's shoulder healed slowly. Eliza changed the dressings twice a day, her hands steady, her voice calm, her presence constant. He never complained, not even when the stitches pulled or the weather turned damp and made the wound throb. The children moved differently now. They spoke less, watched more. Fear had not broken them, but it had sharpened them. Samuel took on more responsibility without being asked. He checked locks. He counted ammunition. He watched the tree line the way Cole did, his posture slowly matching the man's. The younger ones clung closer to Eliza, but even they seemed to understand something had shifted. The world had tried to take them apart and failed. That knowledge settled into them like a quiet kind of steel. Marshal Hale returned 2 weeks later, with papers and grim satisfaction. Boone and his hired men were charged with attempted murder, arson, and unlawful seizure of land. The case would go to territorial court. Hale said it plainly, without drama, as if justice were just another job to be done. Slow and heavy, but necessary. "They'll want statements," Hale said, "from both of you. Possibly from the oldest children." Eliza nodded. "They'll tell the truth." Cole glanced at her, measuring. "You ready to face them again?" "I faced them already," Eliza said. "This is just talking." The journey to town was harder than the first. The children remembered the platform. They remembered the eyes. Eliza felt it too. The old instinct to shrink, to make herself smaller so the world would pass over her. She refused it. She walked through Stonecrow with her shoulders square and her children around her, and if people stared, she let them. The courtroom smelled of ink and damp wool. Boone sat in chains, his confidence replaced by something sour and tight. When Eliza took the stand, she felt the weight of the room press against her, felt the lawyer's eyes sharpen with the intent to cut her apart piece by piece. They tried everything. They questioned her competence, her size, her ability to manage a household with 13 children. They implied she exaggerated the threat. They implied she misunderstood men's intentions. They implied she should be grateful anyone had taken her at all. Eliza answered each question plainly, without anger, without apology. She spoke of facts, of dates, of wounds, of torches thrown at walls where children slept. She spoke of standing between danger and her family, because no one else would. When they asked her why she didn't flee, she said, "Because running wouldn't have saved us. Standing did." Samuel testified next. His voice shook once, then steadied. He spoke of seeing men in the trees, of hearing glass break, of his mother pushing them behind her, of Cole bleeding and still firing. The room listened differently to a boy who had learned these things too young. The verdict came quickly. Boone was found guilty on all charges. His land claims were nullified, his assets seized, the water rights stayed where they belonged. When it was over, Eliza sat on the courthouse steps with the children clustered around her. Exhaustion settling into her bones in waves. Cole sat beside her, his shoulders stiff but usable now, his presence solid. "You did good," he said quietly. "So did you." They returned to the mountain, changed in ways that were difficult to name. The land felt less hostile now, not because it had softened, but because it had been defended. Neighbors began to visit more often, cautious at first, then with growing ease. Some brought tools, some brought food, some brought nothing but their presence, and stayed to talk. Eliza found herself becoming part of something she had not planned for. Not just survival, but community. The children learned names, faces, ways of being that extended beyond the cabin walls. They learned that not every stranger meant harm. Summer arrived fully, bringing with it work that felt almost hopeful. Gardens expanded. Fences were repaired. The cabin gained an extra room with the help of neighbors who showed up without being asked. Eliza cooked for crowds, her hands moving with practiced ease, her laughter surprising her when it escaped. At night, when the children slept and the work was done, Eliza and Cole sat together on the porch, the mountains dark and patient around them. "You ever regret it?" Eliza asked one evening. "That day at the platform." Cole thought for a long moment. "I regret not doing it sooner." Eliza smiled, a small, private thing. It was late August when the truth they had been circling finally spoke itself. The children were inside, arguing over a book by lamplight. The air was warm, heavy with the promise of fall. Cole reached for Eliza's hand without thinking. She let him take it. "I don't know how to do this gently," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "I didn't plan to care," he said. "Didn't plan for anything beyond work and weather. But you came with 13 lives and made this place breathe." Eliza met his eyes. "I didn't plan to trust again." They sat with that honesty between them, unadorned and real. "Whatever this is," Cole said, "it doesn't have to look like anything else." "That's good," Eliza said, "because I don't fit into other shapes very well." He smiled then, slow and genuine. Their marriage did not change in ceremony. There were no grand declarations, but the nights grew closer. The touches lingered. The partnership deepened into something warm and steady and earned. The children noticed, of course. They always did. They accepted it with the same quiet pragmatism they brought to everything else. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked one night, blunt as always. Eliza considered. "I'm safe. I'm needed. I'm respected." Samuel nodded. "That sounds like happy." Winter returned eventually, as it always did. But this time, it did not find them unprepared. Supplies were ample. Wood was stacked high. The children knew their roles. The house was stronger. So were the people inside it. On the longest night of the year, as snow fell heavy and silent outside, Eliza sat by the fire, with 13 children asleep around her, and Cole beside her. His shoulder healed, his presence steady. She thought of the platform, of the ledger, of the number 13 written like a warning. She smiled into the firelight. The frontier had tried to reduce her to a burden. Instead, she had become an anchor. The years that followed did not soften the land, but they changed the way Eliza met it. Winter came again, as it always did. But this time, it arrived to a house that knew how to withstand it. Snow piled against walls that had been reinforced by many hands. Wind rattled shutters that had been replaced twice over and now held. Inside, the children moved with practiced rhythm, each knowing what was expected without being told. There was no panic in the storms anymore, only vigilance, the quiet understanding that survival was a shared act. Eliza watched her children grow into themselves in ways she had once believed impossible. Samuel's shoulders broadened, his voice deepened, and with it came a steady sense of responsibility that never tipped into arrogance. Henry developed a talent for repairing anything that broke, his hands clever and patient. Luke learned the land the way some people learned scripture, reading tracts, clouds, and bird calls with reverence. The girls grew into women who did not apologize for their competence. They cooked, mended, hunted, read, argued, laughed. They took up space. The younger ones followed in their wake, knowing without question that they belonged. Cole became something he had never intended to be. Not just a provider or protector, but a constant. He taught without dominance, corrected without cruelty. He listened more than he spoke. Eliza noticed how the children sought him out now, not from fear or obligation, but from trust. When he spoke, they heard him. When he was silent, they respected it. One evening, as the fire burned low and the children slept, Eliza spoke into the quiet. "Do you ever think about the man you were before us?" Cole considered it. "Sometimes." "And?" she asked. "He wouldn't have survived this," he said simply. Eliza nodded. "Neither would the woman I was before you." Spring returned with an urgency that felt almost celebratory. The creek ran strong. Grass pushed up through thawed earth. The homestead buzzed with work and plans. A new field was cleared. A second barn began to take shape. Neighbors came and went freely now, no longer cautious, no longer curious, simply part of the rhythm of the place. Eliza found herself being asked for advice on preserving food, on managing large families, on surviving grief without letting it rot you from the inside. She never dressed her answers up. She told the truth plainly. Some people didn't like it. Most respected it. The past did not vanish. Sometimes she dreamed of the platform, of the ledger, of the moment the world had weighed her and nearly discarded her. She woke from those dreams not with panic, but with clarity. She would rise, step outside, and breathe in the mountain air until the memory loosened its grip. Cole noticed these moments and never pressed. He would simply stand with her, his presence steady, his silence companionable. The children grew bold enough to ask questions about their future, about land of their own, about leaving, about staying. "You don't owe this place your lives," Eliza told them. "Only your honesty." Some would leave. She knew that. Some would stay. She knew that too. What mattered was that they chose. The trial of Garrick Boone became something people talked about less and less, eventually folding into the long memory of the territory. Boone disappeared into the machinery of punishment. The threat he represented faded, not because evil had been eradicated, but because it had been resisted and defeated where it stood. One late summer evening, with the sky painted red and gold, Cole handed Eliza a folded paper. "What's this?" she asked. "A deed," he said. "I had it amended." Eliza unfolded it slowly, reading the names written there. Both of them. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to," Cole replied. "This isn't just my land. It never was." Eliza swallowed, emotion rising sharp and unexpected. For a long time she had existed at the mercy of other people's permissions. This was not permission. This was recognition. That night, when the house was quiet and the world felt distant, Eliza allowed herself something rare. She cried. Not from fear or exhaustion, but from release. Time passed the way it always did, uneven and unkind and beautiful in flashes. The children aged. The house expanded. The scars remained, but they no longer defined the shape of the days. One winter, years later, Eliza stood on the porch, watching snow fall in thick, steady sheets. Cole stood beside her, older now, his hair more silver than dark. "Do you remember the platform?" he asked. She nodded. "Every detail." "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd been late," he said. Eliza looked at him. "You weren't?" "No," he agreed. "I wasn't." Inside, laughter rose from the kitchen where the younger children were arguing over something trivial. The sound filled the house, warm and alive. Eliza turned back to the snow. "They called me a burden." Cole snorted softly. "They were wrong. They said no one would take us. And they were wrong again." Eliza smiled. "They said 13 children would ruin a man." Cole's arm slipped around her shoulders. "They underestimated the man." She leaned into him, the weight of years settling comfortably between them. The frontier never apologized. It never admitted error. But it did allow, sometimes, for people to prove it wrong by continuing to exist loudly and well. Eliza Turner had been measured, dismissed, nearly dismantled. She had been called too much, too heavy, too complicated, too expensive. She had survived anyway. She had raised 13 children who knew their worth. She had built a home where fear did not rule. She had stood between danger and everything she loved and refused to move. The woman no one wanted had become the woman everyone learned from. And if you stood on that porch with her, years later, watching the snow fall over land she now owned, listening to the sound of a family that stayed together because it chose to, you would understand something simple and difficult and true. She had never been unwanted. The world had simply not known what to do with a woman who refused to be small.